There once was a boy, but also a bear, and all of their friends, of course. And even though he had very little brain, the bear, not the boy, he was sharp for his young age. The bear with little brain had a charming sort of way of letting everyone know what he didn't need to understand for himself. He would walk through the forest, a few of the 100 acres, but not all of them, of course, humming to himself and making up songs on the spot. There was always something to do, even when there wasn't any need to do anything. The bear found himself wrapped up in plenty of adventures and exciting events, all of them magical and delightful, like exploring the North Pole, facing his fears of terrifying creatures, floating through the sky, a lonely little cloud in search of honey. But what he liked best in the whole world was something much simpler than anything grand like an adventure. What he liked best was... well... Let's put a pin in the story there and go back to the beginning to clear a few things up before we resume, shall we? A. Milne, a successful playwright of the early 1900s, was drafted, like most able-bodied men of his nation, into the war to end all wars in 1915, serving his country in the trenches during the Battle of the Somme against the German Empire the following year. Milne's abhorrence for war grew, and he longed for what any sane person would hope for, finding themselves in such despicable circumstances. He longed for peace and understanding. Eventually, he was sent home with trench fever, an infectious disease that left between 1/5 and 1/3 of the British army unable to fight. However, coming back to England did not mean he could just as easily return to his old way of living. War has a way of leaving wounds untreatable by surgery and bandages. After the horror of the World War came to a close, Milne moved away from the hectic city life of London to a house in the country with his wife and then 5-year-old son, with the aim to finish a piece contemplating his vehement hatred for war and a plea for pacifism. Although this was his resolution, Milne instead found himself writing poetry with his son. A collection of children's poems sparsely featuring his child called When We Were Very Young came out in 1924 and became an instant success. More people than just Milne himself seemed to long for simpler times, and children's literature became the perfect antidote for a despondent nation grieving the ones lost in the war. A couple of years later, Milne released another book, which more prominently featured his son, Christopher Robin. And this would alter both the author's and the boy's life completely. Winnie-the-Pooh would become a worldwide phenomenon, spreading joy to people of all ages. There was just one person caught between the crossfires of success and notoriety, who never demanded it in the first place. Christopher Robin, Milne's actual son. Faced with endless interviews and overbearing fans, pun not intended, in these desperate and hopeless times after the war, the innocent child surpassed even the fame of the author. Christopher Robin became a household name, and everyone wanted a piece of that childish wonder and happiness the boy got when playing with his imaginary friends in the books. Even if he at first appreciated the spotlight, between the ages of 5 and 8, Christopher Robin was stretched thin for the benefit of financial success. His childhood became the public's, and his parents looked the other way. After releasing 2 more books featuring his son, Milne finally realized his error in how the boy was treated, and thus Christopher Robin was sent off to a boarding school, meant to give him a fresh start at the age of 10. But the struggles of public life was nothing compared to what was in store for him. His peers at the boarding school would soon find out his identity and bully him relentlessly for it. Christopher Robin Milne spent his adolescence and young adulthood fighting against the world's idea of a boy named after him in a children's book about a stuffed teddy bear. The then young man hated how the books had ruined his life. At the turn of the 1940s, after having pleaded to his father to get him away from the strain of his everyday existence, Christopher Milne then spent his early 20s, like his father before him, fighting for the British Army in the Second War to end all wars, from 1942 to 1945. He returned wounded, but in the very least, alive. In the biographical depiction of the Milne family's lives, Goodbye, Christopher Robin, Christopher talks with his father after his return from the war, arguing about the importance of the books, even if they ruin the boy's life. He reflects on it like this, in an answer to his father's shame. You reminded people what happiness was, what childhood could be, when everything else was broken. This line suggests how Christopher would in the end understand his father's work as a sort of necessary evil. What was his life, after all, against the millions of hopeless people lost in a world shattered by the terrors of war? Perhaps his suffering growing up was not all for nothing, since it left others feeling hopeful of what life could mean. How true this statement rings to the actual person's reflections of his father's work, I'm not the one to explain. Christopher Milne would never accept any of the royalties from the success of the books featuring the character Christopher Robin. The man refused what was not his and left it with the world. He married in 1948 and lived the remainder of his life as a bookshop owner in Dartmouth with his daughter and wife. That could be described as the end of the story, but we've just begun. Let's instead move into the future, my present. Eeyore, the old grey donkey, stood by the side of the stream and looked at himself in the water. Pathetic, he said. That's what it is. Pathetic. He turned and walked slowly down the stream for 20 yards, splashed across it and walked slowly back to the other side. Then he looked at himself in the water again. As I thought, he said. No better from this side, but nobody minds, nobody cares. Pathetic. That's what it is. There was a crackling noise in the bracken behind him, and out came Pooh. Good morning, Eeyore, said Pooh. Good morning, Pooh Bear, said Eeyore gloomily. If it is a good morning, he said, which I doubt, said he. Why, what's the matter? Nothing, Pooh Bear, nothing. We can't all, and some of us don't. That's all there is to it. I grew up with the animated Winnie-the-Pooh movie and series on VHS. We used to watch at my grandparents' house and sing along to the intro of the show when done rewinding the tapes. It was never my favorite or anything, but I believe I sensed some genuine warmth, not present in most other cartoons I saw growing up. Another distinct memory I'll always carry with me about the bear of Little Brain is my mother's measuring Tupperware type of cup that she drank everything from. On it, she'd put a colorful sticker of Pooh, Tigger, Piglet and Eeyore, if I'm not mistaken, from the animated show. It had ripped in a couple of places after years of use, but it held on for longer than she herself did in the end, so there's that as well. My fondness for the show and its characters became, as I suspect for many of my generation, more of a nostalgia trip when reminded of the bear, rather than something I kept up with as I aged. After all, it was made for the eyes of small children, and not made to last as people grow into adulthood, right? When looking at the Disney versions of the characters with their bright and colorful appeal, I'd not exactly blame anyone for believing there's not a ton of depth present underneath their lovable appearance. Until recently, I've held more or less the same belief, but I happened to come across a copy of the original Winnie-the-Pooh book in a thrift store a few weeks ago. It was not in the greatest condition and of course without a dust jacket, but as I began flipping through the pages and admiring the wonderfully charming illustrations by Ernest H. Shepard, I knew I had to get it and give it the chance I had an inkling it deserved. Since I'm an avid reader, although of mostly mid-1900s literary fiction and philosophy, I'd been interested in reading Winnie-the-Pooh for a few years as I heard talk of how it's got more potential than most give it credit. I find people tend to dismiss media aimed at children, seeing it as vapid and lacking the nuance and deep ideas worthy of the adult's limited amount of time. I myself am also quite guilty of thinking similar dismissive thoughts when it comes to less demanding literature. But that's precisely how a lot of us make the mistake of not giving a chance to things still made with love, passion and dedication. It doesn't matter who the target audience is if there's a genuine aim to distill complex systems into graspable and coherent expressive sentences for anyone to enjoy and understand. And as I spent my time in the 100-acre woods with Christopher Robin and his friends, I realized what A.A. Milne managed to achieve with Winnie-the-Pooh is a prime example of literature at its finest, and definitely something more than just a book for small children. Winnie-the-Pooh is for us all, because I believe all of us can learn something or two from this imaginary stuffed bear with little brain. One fine day, Pooh had stumped up to the top of the forest to see if his friend Christopher Robin was interested in bears at all. At breakfast that morning, a simple meal of marmalade spread lightly on a honeycomb or two, he had suddenly thought of a new song. It began like this: "Sing ho, for the life of a bear." When he had got as far as this, he stretched his head and thought to himself, "That's a very good start for a song. But what about the second line?" He tried singing ho 2 or 3 times, but it didn't seem to help. Perhaps it would be better, he thought, if I sang hi for the life of a bear. So he sang it, but it wasn't. "Very well then," he said, "I shall sing that first line twice, and perhaps if I sing it very quickly, I shall find myself singing the third and fourth line before I have the time to think of them, and that will be a good song. Now then, sing ho for the life of a bear, sing ho for the life of a bear. I don't much mind if it rains or snows, 'cause I've got a lot of honey on my nice new nose. I don't much care if it snows or thaws, 'cause I've got a lot of honey on my nice clean paws. Sing ho for a bear, sing ho for a Pooh, and I'll have a little something in an hour or two." We all know who Winnie-the-Pooh is. Most of us have some connection to the forest where we imagine him walking with Piglet up the hill towards Christopher Robin's house. But that doesn't necessarily mean we have any grasp of the profound ideas he's teaching us along the way up the slope. There are 2 main concepts I feel important to explain first for Pooh's wisdom to make any semblance of sense. One comes from an ancient Greek word, and the other takes its root in Buddhist teachings. I'll give an attempt at briefness, but promise nothing, since these concepts deserve a lot more time and attention than this short video about Winnie-the-Pooh can give them. Either way, let's begin by turning the page to ancient Greek philosophy. Eudaimonia, which lacks a suitable English translation, was an idea to the ancient Greeks that surpassed the meaning of happiness in life. They believed one was not to seek mere fleeting feelings like joy and ecstasy, but instead aim to attain to live in harmony with one's highest self. Eudaimonia is human flourishing, living up to one's potential, not just in a materialistic sense, but in a deeper contentment of one's existence as a whole. It occurs when one aligns their virtues with their intention and appreciates the journey freely. The Stoic version of eudaimonia is a sort of disciplined dance, where one moves freely with the order of nature, guided by reason but accepting the flow of things as they are. Perhaps here I'm also reading into it some of my own beliefs about the idea of contentment in life, which leads me to the other concept I mentioned. The Taoist notion of the way, or the Tao, is something rather ephemeral to explain, yet it is in many ways the most lasting thing imaginable, but to refer to it as a thing also feels wholly unworthy of me. The way can be seen as a quiet current beneath everything. If Stoic eudaimonia is a disciplined dance, then to follow the way is more spontaneous and unchecked. Rather than a path to take, it is the natural flow of existence itself, the rhythm by which the universe moves along too. When you follow the Tao, you stop striving against this rhythm and instead flow in harmony with it, allowing things to unfold before you as they must. You yield like water, humble, yet carve the world as you run along the stream of life. These are more or less vain attempts to define the way by describing how it acts or how it is not, rather than saying what it actually is. And this is because it doesn't really work like that with Daoism. Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Chings begins by expressing, "The way that can be spoken of is not the constant way." I found a comment on a Reddit post about Daoism I quite liked as a definition, since it's not really defining what the way actually is, since you can't. The commenter Rake Rochter wrote this: "You'll get pretty close to it," referring to the way, by just subtracting language, words, concepts from everything, which I find a lovely way of looking at it. The way is felt in the stillness of the world when we stop striving to control it. I would be amiss if I failed to mention how these two culturally differing philosophies might be argued to oppose each other on a few grounds, as eudaimonia seeks to attain the human in its most flourished form through actions and virtues, whilst the way is a cosmic harmony humans can abide by to flow with the accordance of everything. One seeks for humanity to prosper through morality, and the other is the law of the universe beyond moral values which we inhabit as such. But why I bring this up is because I believe when it comes to philosophy, it's rarely just about one or the other, but the merging of opposing ideas to bring them to life in existence, since we are creatures of infinite oppositions. And I find this merge of eudaimonia and the way represented perfectly, strangely enough as it might seem, in the character of Winnie-the-Pooh. The old grey donkey, Eeyore, stood by himself in a thistly corner of the forest, his front feet well apart, his head on one side, and thought about things. Sometimes he thought sadly to himself, "Why?" And sometimes he thought, "Wherefore?" And sometimes he thought, "Inasmuch as which?" And sometimes he didn't quite know what he was thinking about. So when Winnie-the-Pooh came stomping along, Eeyore was very glad to be able to stop thinking for a little in order to say, "How do you do?" in a gloomy manner to him. "And how are you?" said Winnie-the-Pooh. Eeyore shook his head from side to side. "Not very how," he said. "I don't seem to have felt at all how for a long time." "Dear, dear," said Pooh, "I'm sorry about that. Let's have a look at you." So Eeyore stood there, gazing sadly at the ground, and Winnie-the-Pooh walked all around him once. "Why, what's happened to your tail?" he said in surprise. "What has happened to it?" said Eeyore. "It isn't there." "Are you sure?" "Well, either a tail is there or it isn't there. You can't make a mistake about it, and yours isn't there." "Then what is?" "Nothing." Winnie-the-Pooh is a lovable bear of little brain, and that is perhaps the key to his wisdom. There's one main point to this idea, which is that Pooh never asks questions of purpose. He asks not why, only how or what. None of his desires or undertakings stem from a why question. He sees or hears a rumbling in his tummy, which lets him know what he wants, and that what usually ends up being as simple as something nice to snack on. People tend to always seek the more-ness out of life. Nothing's ever enough, and there's gotta be something grander out there we have yet to attain. This is not how Pooh goes about his existence. He walks to Christopher Robin's house on the hill, humming to himself along the way. He helps Eeyore find his missing tail, because it's gotta be somewhere. When trapped on a branch during a flood, he floats on a pot of honey along the water. Since he can't remain there forever, he'd run out of provisions. It's never about forcing his way through life. Unlike Rabbit, who is always fussing about things needing to be a certain way, or Piglet, who lets anything that scares him, which is almost everything, get in the way of his part to play. Or even Christopher Robin, who takes charge, leading them along the way of improvement, getting better, growing up. No, this is not the way of Pooh. Pooh is a true being in the world. He accepts the current and flows along with it in harmony, never asking why it happens, but simply what he can do and how. Even when scared of the terrifying heffalumps and woozles, Pooh is not questioning why it's all happening to him. Pooh acts in the present, unlike most others in the 100-acre woods, who acts on account of the future, living for what will happen next. Pooh lives now. What Winnie-the-Pooh thus finds within himself, according to me, is a Taoist form of eudaimonia. Because of his acceptance of the flow of things, Pooh achieves, perhaps due to his lack of brain making it easier for him not to question the world and how it functions, he achieves a peace of mind brought about by the alignment of his selfhood with the universe. Here it might benefit us to look at another philosophical idea, also birthed from war, but this time in France. Absurdism is Albert Camus' jab at the hopelessness of nihilistic thoughts and a guide to living without appeal to the universe. We find ourselves in an unresponsive universe, not giving any answers to our pleas for a meaning to all of it. Camus' depiction of the myth of Sisyphus, a man doomed by the gods with a meaningless task to roll a boulder up a hill for all eternity, reshapes our understanding of what the lack of meaning can entail. Instead of viewing the punishment of the man rolling his boulder for all eternity as a doomed purpose, Camus tells us that one must imagine Sisyphus happy. There need not be merely pain in the meaningless action, and life never needed any meaning in the first place for us to enjoy our time here. Pooh never questions his boulder. Pooh enjoys whatever life throws at him, even if he might not enjoy every moment he finds himself in. I think the game of Pooh sticks is a great example of all of this. The game goes like this. Any number of participants picks out a stick of their own. They stand on a bridge over a gentle stream and let their sticks fall to the water. They then run to the other side of the bridge and wait to see whose stick comes out first. There's no real game here, and one could call the action utterly meaningless, since it has no real effect on the world. But everyone who plays Pooh sticks enjoy themselves immensely. Even Eeyore wants to play. If these examples of Pooh's nature are not the most accurate depiction of a being living their best life, happy rolling any boulder up a hill, then I don't know what is. If happiness can be achieved by someone so simple in their goings about everyday life, then perhaps it's not too difficult to achieve after all. Perhaps we don't have to struggle with grasping for happiness. It's a comforting sort of thing to have, said Christopher Robin, folding up the paper and putting it in his pocket. Come on, Pooh, and he walked off quickly. Where are we going? Said Pooh, hurrying after him and wondering whether it was to be an explore or a what shall I do about you know what. Nowhere, said Christopher Robin. So they began going there, and after they had walked a little way, Christopher Robin said, What do you like best in the world, Pooh? Well, said Pooh, what I like best, and then he had to stop and think. What Christopher Robin asks Pooh here, I believe we can translate into the ever-present question, what's the meaning of life? As an absurdist myself, I have a lot of issues with how we usually deal with that question in media, but I find Pooh's answer to evade the idea of an underlying meaning to the universe with ease. He first thinks of the material pleasures in life, for him, honey, but then realizes how that is not the whole truth. After that, he wonders if not the moment before you put that sweet thing in your mouth is actually better than simply eating it. But that also doesn't sit right with him as the complete truth. He then brings Christopher Robin into the picture and Piglet, wondering if not spending time with friends is the best thing there is. How intimacy and a feeling of the collective is perhaps worth more than either the idea of pleasure or pleasure itself. But after giving it some thought, Pooh realizes what he believes to be the truth. It's not just one thing or the other, rather it's everything he lives through. We can describe his reply as the way, Daoism, or as the experience of eudaimonia, or as someone happy rolling a boulder up a hill for all eternity. But I believe the most faithful translation to what he says is the one where we stop trying to find some meaning in his words, just like we don't have to find some underlying meaning to life. Pooh puts it simply as this. What I like best in the whole world is me and Piglet going to see you, and you saying, what about a little something? And me saying, well, I shouldn't mind a little something, should you, Piglet? And then it being a hummy sort of day outside, and birds singing. There's no explanation necessary for what he says. The collection of things he expresses doesn't really matter, as they are just what make up his particular life. What means something here is just what he is. He just wants to be where he is. Just be, and that's the best thing there is in the world. You flourish as a being whilst you flow in harmony with the unresponsive universe, happy, content, not needing more. You go somewhere and then something happens, and you go somewhere else, and then it is what it is. Life. Christopher Robin also expresses something similar when he responds how he prefers doing nothing. I like that too, said Christopher Robin, but what I like doing best is nothing. How do you do nothing? Asked Pooh, after it wondered for a long time. Well, it's when people call out at you as you're going off to do it. What are you going to do, Christopher Robin? And you say, oh, nothing, and then you go and do it. Oh, I see, said Pooh. This is a nothing sort of thing that we're doing now. Oh, I see, said Pooh again. It means just going along, listening to all the things you can't hear, and not bothering. Oh, said Pooh. Feel free to leave a comment about any wisdom you find in Pooh that I failed to mention. And if you like what you saw, stick around and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.